I never thought I'd be the kind of person to fight back. Growing up in Lubbock, Texas, I was raised to keep my head down, do my work, and trust that the right people would notice. My mama always said that hard work speaks for itself, and for most of my life, I believed her. I believed it through high school, through my business administration degree at Texas Tech, and straight into my first real corporate job at a mid-sized logistics company called Meridian Freight Solutions, based just outside of Austin. I believed it right up until the moment a man named Derek Calloway decided that I was going to be his personal punching bag. I started at Meridian 2 weeks after graduation, 22 years old, and so eager it was almost embarrassing. My official title was Operations Coordinator, which in practice meant I handled scheduling, vendor communications, route optimization support, and about 40 other things that weren't in my job description. I shared an open-plan office with 11 other people, and from day one, I loved almost every single one of them. There was Marcus, who sat 2 desks over and always brought collages on Fridays. There was Patrice, the senior logistics analyst who took me under her wing without me even having to ask. There was funny, sarcastic Tom from accounting who kept a miniature cactus on his desk and named it Gerald. These were good people. Real people. The kind of coworkers you actually look forward to seeing on a Monday morning. And then there was Derek. Derek Calloway had been the operations manager at Meridian for 6 years by the time I arrived. He was 43, thick through the middle, with a salt and pepper beard he clearly thought made him look distinguished. He drove a lifted black truck with a Meridian parking sticker slapped on the rear window like a badge of honor, and he had the kind of handshake that lasted just a beat too long. The first time I met him during my onboarding, he looked me up and down and said, "So, you're the new girl. Let's hope you last longer than the last one." I laughed nervously because I didn't know what else to do. Patrice, who was standing behind him, gave me a look that I would come to understand meant, just let it go. I let a lot of things go in those first few months. Derek made comments about my age constantly. He'd say things like, "I forget. Did you even finish college yet?" in front of the whole team during meetings. When I submitted my first major vendor reconciliation report, and it was completely accurate, he handed it back to me with 3 minor formatting notes and said, "Not bad for first try," even though Patrice later told me it was one of the cleaner reports she'd seen in years. He never missed an opportunity to qualify whatever I did. It was always almost good, nearly there, getting better. Never just good. Never just, "Well done, Ashley." That's my name, by the way. Ashley Renee Carter. Named after my grandmother on my daddy's side, who was the toughest woman in Lubbock County and who I hoped, more than anything, I had inherited something from. The pattern started subtly, the way these things always do. Derek would assign me work verbally, without any written confirmation, and then when something shifted or went sideways, he'd imply in front of others that I had misunderstood. "I said Tuesday, Ashley. I'm pretty sure I said Tuesday." And because there was no email trail, because I had been young and trusting enough to just write his instructions in my own notebook, I had no way to prove otherwise. The first time it happened, I felt embarrassed. The second time, I felt confused. The third time, I felt something else entirely. I felt like I was being set up. I started keeping records after that third incident. Not because I had some grand legal strategy. Not because I'd watched enough courtroom dramas to know what documentation meant. I started keeping records because something in my gut told me that if I didn't start writing things down, one day I'd be sitting in an HR office with no proof of anything, and Derek would just keep on driving that lifted black truck to work like nothing ever happened. I bought a small spiral notebook, the kind with a blue cover, and I kept it in my desk drawer. Every time Derek gave me a verbal instruction, I wrote down the date, the time, what he said, and who was in the room. Then I started following up every verbal conversation with a brief email. "Hi Derek, just confirming what we discussed. You'd like the carrier invoices reconciled by Thursday the 14th. Let me know if I have anything wrong." He never replied to correct me, which told me everything. About 4 months in, things escalated. Meridian had a quarterly performance review cycle, and Derek was responsible for submitting written evaluations for everyone on our team. I had worked harder in those 4 months than I had ever worked in my life. I had streamlined our vendor check-in process in a way that saved the company something like 11 hours of administrative time per week. Patrice had told me about it, quietly, and without fanfare, the way she told me most true things. When my performance review came back, Derek had rated me as meets expectations across the board, with a note in the comment section that read, Ashley shows potential but needs to develop greater confidence in high-pressure situations. I read that sentence 4 times sitting at my desk. I had not cracked under pressure once. I had stayed late 3 Tuesdays in a row to cover a vendor dispute that was not technically my responsibility. I had presented solutions to Derek in 2 separate team meetings, clearly and calmly, while he sat with his arms crossed and nodded like he was doing me a favor just by listening. Needs to develop greater confidence. I kept my face completely still. I said nothing. I went home that evening, sat on my apartment floor in my work clothes, and called my mama, who listened for 20 minutes and then said, Baby, that man is scared of you. Scared people are dangerous. You be careful. I was careful, but I was also done being passive. I requested a one-on-one meeting with Derek to discuss my review. He seemed surprised by this. Most people on the team accepted their reviews without comment, I think because Derek had a way of making you feel like pushing back would only make things worse. He agreed to meet with me on a Wednesday afternoon, and I walked into his office with my notebook, a printed copy of my review, and a 1-page document I had prepared listing my specific contributions from the previous quarter, each one with a date, a measurable outcome, and where relevant, a supporting email in my sent folder. I sat down, thanked him for his time, and then calmly walked through my list. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just said, I want to understand the basis for these ratings because here is what I accomplished this quarter. He shifted in his chair. He said something vague about soft skills and team dynamics. I said, Can you give me a specific example of a situation where my confidence was a problem? He couldn't. He said he'd take my feedback under consideration. I thanked him and left. Nothing changed on paper, but something changed in the room after that meeting. Derek knew that I wasn't someone who was just going to absorb whatever he handed me and stay quiet. The next thing he tried was isolation. Over the following month, I started noticing that I was being left off of email chains I should have been included in. Meeting invites would go to Marcus and Tom and the others, and I would find out about the meeting either from Patrice or from the calendar notification that appeared when someone forwarded me the notes afterward. Derek would claim it was an oversight, an accident, just a technical glitch. It happened 4 times in 6 weeks. I documented each one. I forwarded myself every email where I could visibly see the omission. I was building something, though I still wasn't completely sure what I was building it for. What I was sure about was that I wasn't alone. After that 3rd calendar omission, I was getting coffee in the break room when Tom came in and lowered his voice and said, You know this isn't about your work, right? I looked at him. He shrugged, like he'd said more than he meant to. But then he said, He did this to Jenna before you. And to the girl before Jenna. I asked what had happened to them. Tom looked at the door, then back at me and said, They both quit. I was not going to quit. I went home that night and did something I probably should have done months earlier. I researched Meridian's official HR policies and the Texas Workforce Commission's guidelines on workplace harassment. I wasn't ready to file anything yet. I didn't have enough and I needed to be smart. But I wanted to understand exactly what I was working with, what the thresholds were, and what my options looked like if things continued to escalate. I also looked up the name of Meridian's HR director. Her name was Sandrine Gwynn. She had been with the company for 8 years and had a LinkedIn profile that described her professional focus as equitable workplace practices. I noted her name. I hoped I would never need to use it, but I suspected I would. About a month later, Derek crossed a line that was less ambiguous than anything that had come before. We had a team meeting on a Thursday morning, and during that meeting I presented a proposal I had been working on for 2 weeks, a revised routing protocol that would reduce our average delivery window by about 18%. I had run the numbers. Patrice had quietly reviewed my methodology and told me it was solid. I stood at the front of the room and walked through the proposal clearly and professionally. Derek sat at the head of the table. When I finished, there was a beat of silence, and then Marcus said, "That's actually really smart." 2 others nodded. And then Derek leaned back in his chair and said, with a kind of slow, deliberate amusement that I will never forget, "It's a cute idea, But maybe let's have someone with a little more experience take a look before we get too excited. The room went quiet in a different way after that. Not the quiet of consideration. The quiet of second-hand embarrassment. Patrice looked at the table. Marcus looked at his hands. Tom looked directly at me, and I could see in his face that he was genuinely sorry. I looked at Derek and said, "That's fine. I welcome any additional review. I'm confident in the numbers." Then I sat down. That word, cute, sat in my chest like a stone for the rest of that day. Not because it hurt me personally, though it did, but because I knew exactly what he was doing. He was doing it in front of witnesses. He was doing it on a Thursday morning in a conference room with 8 people present, which meant those 8 people were now themselves witnesses to his behavior, whether they wanted to be or not. I wrote it all down that afternoon. Date, time, location, exact words as best I could recall, and the names of every person present. Then I wrote a follow-up email to Derek. "Hi Derek, following up on this morning's meeting, I'll plan to move forward with preparing a more detailed version of the routing proposal for further review. Please let me know if there are specific aspects you'd like examined more closely." Professional. Documented. In writing. He did not respond. 2 days later, Patrice stopped by my desk and said, quietly, "I heard what he said. It wasn't okay." I nodded. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to let him keep going until he gives me enough, and then I'm going to HR." She looked at me for a long moment, and I wasn't sure if she was going to try to talk me out of it. Instead, she just said, "You'd better have everything in writing." I told her I already did. She nodded once, like that was exactly the right answer, and went back to her desk. It took 3 more weeks. What finally pushed me to Sandra Nguyen's door was not a dramatic explosion. It was something smaller and, in some ways, uglier. Derek submitted a project reassignment memo to the broader operations team that quietly removed me from a vendor partnership initiative I had been leading for 2 months, an initiative that was going well, that the vendor contact, a woman named Carol from DFW Distribution, had specifically praised in an email she copied me on. The memo listed Tom as the new lead, with no explanation for the change, and my name did not appear anywhere in it despite the 2 months of work I had put in. When I asked Derek directly, he told me he was rebalancing the team's workload. When I asked why there had been no conversation with me first, he said he didn't need to explain every administrative decision to every member of the team. I went home that night, and I printed everything. Every documented incident in my notebook, transcribed to a clean typed document. Every relevant email, organized by date. The original routing proposal with its meeting notes. The reassignment memo. The performance review, with its unsupported commentary. I organized it into a PDF, and then I also kept a printed copy because I was not taking chances. The next morning, I emailed Sandra Nguyen and requested a private meeting. She responded within the hour. I walked into Sandra's office the following Monday with my folder and a calm that surprised even me. I had expected to be nervous. I had spent the whole weekend going over what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, making sure I wasn't going to sound emotional or reactive or like someone with a personal grudge. I didn't want to seem like I was angry. I wanted to seem like what I was, a professional employee with a documented pattern of mistreatment and a very clear account of what had happened. Sandra listened to everything without interrupting. She was a composed woman in her late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a notepad in front of her that she took careful notes on throughout our conversation. When I finished, she asked several clarifying questions, specific dates, whether I had witnesses for certain incidents, whether I had reported anything to Derek directly. I answered each question with a reference to a specific document. She reviewed my folder methodically. At one point she paused at the routing proposal meeting notes, and I could see something shift in her expression, just slightly. Before I left, Sandra told me that she would conduct a confidential review, that she would speak with other members of the team, and that I should continue to document anything that occurred in the interim. She also told me that retaliation against an employee for raising workplace concerns was a serious policy violation and would be treated as such. I thanked her and walked out. I felt something on the way back to my desk that I hadn't felt in months. I felt like I had done the right thing at the right time in the right way, and that whatever happened next, I had not let him make me disappear quietly like the two women before me. The next 2 weeks were some of the longest of my life. Sandra moved discreetly. I noticed that she had brief, closed-door conversations with Marcus and Tom and two others on the team, though no one said anything to me about it directly. Derek's behavior didn't change dramatically, but there was something slightly different in how he looked at me, a wariness that hadn't been there before, like he'd started doing the math and wasn't entirely sure how it was coming out. On a Thursday afternoon, about 15 days after my meeting with Sandra, I was called into a conference room. Sandra was there. So was our division VP, a man named Robert Fielding who I had met exactly twice and who had always seemed like a decent, no-nonsense person. Derek was not present. Robert told me that following an internal investigation, the company had substantiated a pattern of conduct on Derek's part that was inconsistent with Meridian's workplace policies. He said that appropriate action was being taken, that the details of personnel decisions were confidential, but that I should know my concerns had been heard and taken seriously. Sandra added that the routing proposal I had presented would be formally reviewed by the operations leadership team and that my name would be properly credited on the initiative going forward. Robert looked at me directly and said, "We appreciate your professionalism throughout this process, Ashley. It made a real difference." I thanked them both. I kept my voice even. I walked back to my desk and I sat down and I stared at my computer screen for a full minute before I started typing anything. Derek was gone by the end of the following week. There was no announcement. His office just had the lights off one Tuesday morning and a plant removed from the windowsill by afternoon. Some people asked around quietly. Most people, I think, already had a sense of what had happened and why. Tom came to my desk that Friday with 2 cups of coffee and set one down in front of me, without a word. I looked up at him. He said, "You know Gerald the cactus has been rooting for you this whole time." I laughed so hard I nearly knocked over the cup. Patrice waited until everyone else had left for the day before she came over. She stood at the edge of my desk and looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "I've seen 3 people go through that with Derek. You're the first one who didn't leave." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "I thought about leaving. Almost every week." She nodded. "The difference is you thought about it and stayed anyway." She picked up her bag. "That's not nothing, Ashley. That's everything." 2 months after Derek left, the routing proposal I had built was formally implemented across Meridian's Central Texas operations. When the quarterly metrics came in, our average delivery window had decreased by just over 16%, nearly exactly what my numbers had projected. Robert Fielding sent a company-wide email acknowledging the improvement and specifically naming me as the coordinator behind the initiative. I read my name in that email 3 times. Not because I needed the validation. I had stopped needing it from Derek a long time ago. But because it was true, and it was documented, and no one could take it back. I stayed at Meridian for another 2 years after that. By the time I left for a senior operations role at a company in Dallas, I had built something at that Austin office that I was genuinely proud of, not just the projects and the processes, but the habit of doing things right, of speaking up, of writing everything down, of not letting the wrong people define what you're capable of. I still have that blue spiral notebook. It sits in a box in my closet, and some days I open it and look at those early entries. The shaky handwriting from the first incident, the dates neatly recorded, the times written in the margin like I was building a case because I knew even then that I was building a case. My grandmother used to say that the truth doesn't need your help to survive, but it does need a witness. I became my own witness. And when the time came, that turned out to be exactly enough. Derek Calloway picked the wrong employee. I made sure he never forgot it.